There are quiet regions of the universe where time seems to stretch into gentle ribbons, where the stars glow with a softness that feels almost thoughtful, and where drifting becomes the most natural thing in the world. Whenever my ship glides through places like these, far from engines, far from planets, wrapped only in the low hum of the hull, I find myself remembering the way humanity first learned to travel without moving, a way of drifting that began not out here among the slow-turning constellations, but in a quiet room on Earth, under fluorescent lights that hummed far less beautifully than the stars. Before we ever touched warp geometry, we once believed the speed of light was the universe's final word. A hard edge, a cosmic boundary, the furthest the laws of nature would allow us to go. But boundaries in the universe are often softer than they appear. Light moves at its famous speed not because the universe demands it, but because it is following the shape of space. And space itself, space can stretch, fold, ripple, and drift in ways that ignore the rules we try to place upon it. The early universe expanded faster than light without ever breaking a law. Gravity curves light around stars without ever touching it, and hidden inside these gentle truths was the possibility that one day someone would notice the quiet softness in the mathematics. In a small laboratory, a group of researchers started listening. They studied the vacuum, the so-called emptiness between particles, and found that it wasn't empty at all. Tiny fluctuations danced in and out of existence, brief sparks in the fabric of reality, appearing only to vanish again a moment later. These fluctuations were delicate, unpredictable, but they were real, and they carried with them the faint rhythm of a universe that never truly sits still. The researchers wondered, what would happen if they shaped these fluctuations? Not forced them, but guided them gently, the way a hand can guide water without splitting it. They built a craft no larger than a refrigerator, suspended in a magnetic cradle. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't sleek. But beauty doesn't matter when you're trying to listen to the universe. What mattered was the field around it, a quiet shell of energy designed to coax space into curving. The team worked late into the night, adjusting coils, realigning sensors, whispering half-thought theories to one another in the dim hum of the room. They weren't expecting a miracle. They were hoping for a whisper. And the universe whispered back. When the generators activated, the craft didn't shake or glow. Instead, the air shimmered like the soft distortion above warm pavement. The edges of the craft blurred, and then, gently, effortlessly, it slipped from one spot in the chamber to another. No acceleration, no sound, no force. Inside the craft, instruments recorded perfect stillness. Outside the craft, space had rearranged itself. It was the first warp bubble, not a bubble of energy, not a bubble of force, but a bubble of geometry. A small curve in space-time where the laws of distance relaxed. Inside that bubble, nothing moved. Outside, the bubble itself drifted along a fold. It was like sitting in a small boat while the river carries you forward. The scientists repeated the experiment again and again, each time watching the craft disappear in a soft shimmer and reappear as calmly as if nothing had happened. What they discovered that night wasn't a way to go faster. It was a way to be still while the universe gently carried you. The warp bubble taught us that motion was never the heart of travel geometry was. If space could fold, then distance could shorten. And if distance could shorten, then the stars were never as far as we once believed. It was a quiet revelation, the kind that reshapes everything without raising its voice. As the experiments grew, the team discovered something even softer, even stranger. Each time a bubble formed, space-time released a faint pulse, an oscillation like a slow heartbeat. It wasn't loud, it wasn't bright, it was just there. A gentle acknowledgement from the universe itself, like a ripple spreading from a small stone dropped into still water. They named it the Lambda Echo. It didn't warn, it didn't threaten. It simply existed, like a reminder that space is alive with subtleties most people never notice. Years later, when the first warp-capable probe drifted into the fold and returned untouched, people across the world paused. For the first time, the stars didn't feel unreachable. They felt near, as if they had always been just behind a soft curtain, waiting for someone patient enough to draw it back. And tonight, drifting in my own vessel through a quiet stretch of glowing dust, I think about how everything changed the moment humanity realized that the universe wasn't resisting us, it was ready to carry us. In the months that followed the first successful fold, the researchers continued to explore the soft edges of space-time with a patience that felt almost meditative. They weren't chasing speed. They weren't racing toward distant stars. They were learning how to breathe with the universe. Each experiment was a quiet conversation, a gentle question asked through coils and sensors. And each time the bubble formed, space-time offered the same soft reply, a ripple, a drift, a small shift that carried the test craft without effort. The team began to notice patterns in these ripples. They were never sharp, never abrupt. They rose slowly, then faded, like the lingering warmth of a sunbeam after the star has dipped behind a hill. These ripples hinted at something deeper, something that lay beneath the familiar geometry of reality. Not another dimension, but an underlying softness, like a layer of fabric beneath a smooth sheet. When the bubble passed through this hidden layer, the ripple appeared, and then it vanished, leaving only the faintest trace in the readings. One evening, long after most of the facility lights had dimmed, a scientist stayed in the observation chamber to watch the regulators hum in the dark. She listened to the soft vibration of the bubble forming, felt the faint tremor beneath her feet as the field aligned. She said later that it reminded her of the ocean tides she used to watch as a child, how the water rose slowly, touched the shore, and drifted back again. "The universe has tides too," she whispered into her recorder. "We never noticed because we were too loud." That sentence would eventually define the entire project. The quieter humanity became, the more the universe revealed. The researchers found that the smoother the bubble, the more gently space folded. Abrupt changes created turbulence, small distortions that resisted motion. But when the bubble was shaped with stillness, tuned with a calm, steady hand space, welcomed it, allowing the fold to glide with almost dreamlike ease. The first long-range test vessel was built with that philosophy in mind. It wasn't designed to push through anything. It was designed to float. Its surface was smooth, its interior lined with instruments to record even the gentlest shift in geometry. When it was placed into the chamber, the air quieted around it. as if the room itself refused to disturb the moment. When the warp bubble formed, the vessel drifted into the fold with the softness of a falling leaf. It vanished from the sensors, not abruptly, but gradually, as if sinking into a warm pool. Moments later, it returned, resting lightly in its cradle. But something had changed. Not the vessel itself, it was identical in every measurable way, but the data it carried. Time inside the bubble had shifted by the smallest fraction, barely detectable, a sliver of a sliver, but real. A gentle reminder that space and time are threads woven together, and when one bends, the other sways with it. The temporal drift was not harmful. It was soft, like the difference between two clocks drifting out of sync by the quietest tick. But it was enough to show that the bubble had touched a place where time flowed differently. The scientists studied this drift with the same calm attention they gave to everything else. And the more they listened, the more they felt that the universe was inviting them deeper into its quiet architecture. As humanity prepared the next generation of warp vessels, philosophers, engineers, and observers gathered to discuss what it meant to shape space-time so gently. They spoke softly, aware of how fragile their new understanding was. They wondered about the ripples left behind, about the subtle memory the universe carried. Others believed they were markers, small signatures that space-time used to keep track of its movements, but no one felt threatened by them. They were too delicate for fear. Meanwhile, the world beyond the laboratory changed in its own gentle way. Children asked their teachers if stars had doors. Artists painted spirals of soft light and dotted their canvases with bubbles drifting between constellations. Travelers dreamed of gliding through folded space, watching galaxies flow past like distant lanterns. Even those who didn't understand the physics felt the shift, felt that something profound had opened, something that made the night sky feel closer and warmer. As for me, drifting now through the quiet stretch between two faint suns, I keep remembering the way the first warp paths were charted, not with urgency, not with ambition, but with awe. Pilots learned to read the soft flows of space-time, the curves that drifted like invisible currents. They mapped the areas where bubbles glided most smoothly, marking them like old sailors marked gentle winds. Travel became a peaceful art, a way of moving with the universe rather than through it. Sometimes I look through the viewport and imagine the scientists in that quiet lab, watching their instruments glow in the blue-tinted dark. They probably never imagined that their work would one day carry travelers through starfields like this. They probably never imagined sleepy ships drifting through cosmic night, guided by the softest folds of space. But it did, and it all began with a shimmer in the air, a whisper in the geometry, and a small craft that slipped gently from one point to another without ever moving at all. There came a moment in the development of warp travel when humanity realized it was not just learning how to move through space, but how to coexist with it. The early experiments had shown that the warp bubble flowed like a soft current, responding to balance rather than force, to harmony rather than precision alone. But the deeper the researchers ventured into these quiet fields of geometry, the clearer it became that the universe was offering something more subtle, a glimpse into its deeper rhythms. Not the loud ones shaped by gravity and light, but the hidden ones shaped by the softness of curvature and the barely perceptible motion of the vacuum. The most curious part of these experiments was how calm everything remained. Even when the test vessels traveled distances that should have taken hours, days, or years, the instruments inside the craft recorded stillness, not a tremor, not a shift. It was as though the vessel had been gently held by the universe, carried across the darkness like a small stone in a quiet stream. This stillness had a profound effect on the people studying it. They spoke more softly. They moved more quietly. Some said they felt as though they were standing in the presence of something sacred, not in a spiritual sense, but in the sense that they were touching a part of reality that had always existed, patiently waiting to be discovered. As data accumulated, the team began noticing a pattern they had overlooked at first. Whenever a warp bubble formed, the instruments registered a faint oscillation, a soft vibration in the curvature around the vessel. Slow, rhythmic, gentle. It was not noise, not error, not interference. It was something consistent, always appearing at the moment the bubble stabilized, always fading shortly after. They called it the lambda echo, but privately many on the team gave it a softer name, the breath, because it felt like that, like a slow, calm inhale from the fabric of space, followed by an equally calm exhale as the bubble dissolved. Some wondered what it meant. Was the universe reacting to the bubble? Was it settling into a new shape? Or was the bubble brushing against a deeper, quieter layer of space-time, one that normally lies beyond the reach of matter, motion, or light? No one knew, and no one felt the need to answer immediately. The echo was gentle, harmless, almost soothing, like the distant sound of waves breaking on a shore you cannot see. The scientists simply recorded it, observed it, and let it become part of the story they were slowly uncovering. When the first crewed vessel was prepared, the atmosphere surrounding the project was not tense. It was calm. The ship was shaped like a smooth ellipsoid, its interior padded and silent, its instruments arranged with a serenity that felt more like a meditation pod than a spacecraft. The pilot selected for the mission spent weeks practicing slow breathing, not because it was required, but because it simply felt appropriate. Warp travel was different. It did not demand bravery or boldness. It demanded stillness. When the warp bubble enveloped the vessel, the pilot reported no sensation at all, no tilt, no pull, no tremor. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched into soft lines, but not violently. They elongated gradually, like reflections shimmering across a pool. The pilot described the moment as floating on the quietest ocean I have ever known, and when the ship drifted back into its normal coordinates, the only sound inside was the soft exhale of the regulators powering down. As more warp voyages took place, navigators learned that space-time was full of gentle currents. Some regions folded easily. Others required softer approaches. The ships adapted. The bubbles adjusted. Travelers grew familiar with the faint pulse of the lambda echo, hearing it as a distant reminder that they were gliding along curves older than the stars themselves. With time, humanity grew comfortable wandering along these quiet paths. People traveled to distant stations that once required months of flight. Families moved between colonies, nestled around other suns. Researchers built observatories inside regions where the geometry bent softly, letting them study cosmic phenomena without disturbing their surroundings. Everywhere the warp bubble went, it carried with it this same calm, this same soft unfolding of distance. I often think about the first time I drifted into a warp corridor that spanned between two star clusters. The darkness outside was deep and velvety, punctuated only by slow-turning constellations. As the bubble carried the ship forward, the stars rearranged themselves like a mobile hanging above a sleeping child, rotating with a gentleness that made time feel less rigid. Hours passed without notice. Space opened and closed around the vessel, folding like silk. And somewhere in the background, faint but steady, I sensed the lambda echo, soft, slow, timeless. It felt less like a signal and more like a presence. During one voyage, a philosopher aboard a research vessel described warp travel as listening to the universe breathing in its sleep. And perhaps that was the best description anyone had ever given. Because as humanity moved deeper into these quiet folds, the old idea of travel as struggle, as conquest, as a race against limits, simply dissolved. Motion became gentle. Distance became flexible. The universe became a companion rather than an obstacle. Every warp bubble leaves a tiny ripple in space-time, but the ripples fade, like footprints in dust, like a whisper after it has traveled across a still room. And as ships drift farther from Earth, following pathways that curve softly through the night, those ripples remain as quiet memories, marking the places where the universe carried us with its patient hands. I have drifted through many such places, watching the glow of distant nebulae pulse gently through the warped glass. Each journey feels like stepping into a dream, slow, drifting, free of weight. And with every trip, I feel the same calm understanding rise in me once more. The universe was never cold. It was never distant. It was simply waiting for us to learn how to move with its quiet rhythm. As the years passed and warp travel became more familiar, humanity began to weave itself gently into the broader tapestry of the cosmos. No longer confined to the narrow currents carved by rockets and fuel, people drifted across star systems the way seeds drift on a calm breeze. Ships glided between worlds with the serenity of lanterns floating in a quiet night sky. Travelers slept peacefully inside warp bubbles that cradled them through the soft folds of geometry. And everywhere people went, they carried with them the quiet wonder of that first shimmering experiment in the laboratory on Earth. Somewhere during this quiet expansion, a fascinating insight emerged. Warp travel was changing the way people thought about existence. No longer did they see themselves as small creatures clinging to a single planet. They began to view themselves as part of a wider, softer universe, a place where distance was flexible and time flowed like a slow river. Philosophers, poets, and dreamers found themselves drawn to the idea that the cosmos was not an obstacle but a companion, that the stars were gentle, that the vacuum was alive with hidden rhythms. This change in perspective came from the simple experience of drifting. When you glide through a warp corridor, there is nothing to fight against, no harsh acceleration, no roaring engines. The ship sits in silence, held inside a cradle of curved space-time, while the universe does all the moving. The mind adapts to that stillness. Thoughts lengthen, like shadows at twilight. Breaths deepen. Worries slip away as naturally as dust settling in low gravity. Travelers often felt as though they were floating in a dream, conscious, alert, yet wrapped in a tranquility that softened every sensation. Even seasoned scientists found themselves surrendering to the calm of the bubble. They would stand quietly near the observation windows, watching how the stars stretched into pale ribbons during the fold, then slowly gathered themselves again as the ship returned to ordinary space. What once felt like a miracle now felt like a kind of cosmic meditation, a slow conversation between human intention and the pliable fabric of the universe. But alongside this peace came another gentle mystery. The lambda echo became clearer, not louder, just more defined. Like a faint melody becoming easier to recognize the more often you hear it. The pulse appeared every time a bubble formed. A slow rise, a slower fall. A pattern that seemed to belong not to the ship, not to the regulator, but to the fabric of space-time itself. Researchers began to suspect that the warp bubble brushed against deeper structures hidden within the vacuum, layers of geometry that ordinary physics rarely touched. These structures weren't realms or dimensions. They were more like hidden seams in a vast quilt, stitches holding the universe together in ways too subtle to detect without bending space gently. The bubble created the gentlest possible disturbance, and the echo was the universe settling itself again afterward. Some speculated that if humanity ever followed these faint seams, it might discover routes through reality even more delicate than the warp folds themselves. Others cautioned that these ideas were too poetic to be useful, but the idea persisted. Perhaps the universe was deeper than anyone had ever guessed. Perhaps it had layers, the way a coastline has tides above and currents below. Perhaps space-time was not one continuous sheet, but a collection of soft folds resting together. During a long drift through a region of deep space silence, I once found myself thinking about these layers. Outside the window, the stars were dim and scattered, as if the universe were pausing between breaths. The warp bubble hummed gently, holding the ship in a sphere of perfect stillness. For a moment, it felt as though I were floating not inside space, but inside the quiet between spaces, some soft region where the cosmos dreams. That was the moment I understood something simple. Warp travel was not just a discovery. It was a change in the way humans related to the universe. Before warp geometry, we thought of space as a void, a harsh, empty expanse we had to fight our way through. After warp geometry, we realized the void was not empty at all. It was a sea of possibilities, full of patterns and ripples and gentle structures waiting to be listened to. And we did listen. As the technology spread, humanity began exploring distant systems with a new kind of curiosity. Not the hungry curiosity of conquerors, but the soft curiosity of wanderers. Warp ships drifted through asteroid belts, glided around collapsing stars, hovered near the edges of nebulae that shimmered with colors no human language could fully capture. Travelers lingered near cosmic phenomena just to watch them breathe. The universe became a place to rest as much as a place to explore. The longer humanity drifted, the more natural warp travel became. People began to treat the bubble not as a machine, but as a quiet companion, a small moment of stillness that wrapped around them during each journey. Even the engineers who maintained the regulators spoke of the bubble with a kind of affection. They would run their hands softly across the humming surface of the coils and say it felt like touching the edge of a dream. Once, during a voyage across a long, gentle curve of folded space, a traveler told me that warp travel made them feel as though they were reading the universe's diary. Each ripple, each echo, each subtle shift felt like a line of writing in a language older than stars. A story told without words, carried in the shapes of space-time itself. I understood what they meant. Warp travel teaches you to pay attention not to noise, but to quiet, not to distance, but to how distance can melt into softness. And when you learn to move with the universe rather than through it, you begin to sense its deeper kindness. You begin to realize that the cosmos has room for you, that it always did. Over time, the gentle mystery surrounding warp travel deepened. The more humanity drifted through the quiet folds of space-time, the more clearly we felt that the warp bubble was touching something subtle, something hidden just beneath the surface of the universe. It wasn't another world, nor another dimension, nor anything dramatic. It was more like a deeper softness, a layer of geometry that revealed itself only when approached with balance and calm. Ordinary matter never touched it, light never brushed it, but the bubble, with its steady, silent curves, seemed to glide alongside this invisible structure, as if tracing the edge of a sleeping tide. Researchers tried to describe this layer in equations, but numbers fell short. They spoke of it instead in metaphors, threads beneath the fabric, currents beneath the surface, not scientifically precise, but emotionally honest, because whatever lay beneath space-time felt more like a mood than a mechanism, something ancient, something patient, something that had been part of the universe long before stars learned to burn. As warp missions grew longer, the lambda echo grew clearer. It remained soft, but the pattern sharpened, becoming easier to measure. The pulse rose gently at the moment the bubble formed, held for a long moment as the fold stabilized, and faded as the bubble dissolved. Its rhythm was slow, like the heartbeat of something enormous and sleeping far beneath the surface of reality. Some wondered whether the bubble was brushing against a boundary. Others believed it was simply the universe reacting to its own curvature being gently rearranged. But no matter the interpretation, the echo became a familiar companion to every warp traveler, a faint reminder that the bubble was gliding through a deeper, quieter place than normal space. Because of this, the next step in warp research was taken with unusual tenderness. The scientists prepared a long-range probe, one designed not to race through space, but to drift through one of the softest folds ever attempted. They chose a destination not for its distance, but for its calm, a region of interstellar space far from stars, planets, and gravitational currents. A quiet place, a place where the bubble could glide with minimal disturbance. The probe itself was shaped almost like a seed, smooth, balanced, built to rest in perfect stillness. When it settled into the chamber, the air felt heavy with anticipation, though not the tense kind. It was the anticipation of watching a ripple glide across water, not dramatic, not urgent, just quietly meaningful. The regulators hummed. The bubble expanded around the vessel, shimmering faintly like a thin veil. And then, as always, the vessel drifted away, disappearing into the fold with a calmness that made silence feel like the most natural thing in the universe. The probe's signal faded as expected, swallowed gently by the curvature. Minutes passed. Then more. The monitoring room was quiet, not fearful, not uncertain, just waiting the way one waits for a soft tide to return. When the probe reappeared, it was not with a burst of light or a sudden jolt. It simply materialized in its cradle, as if it had been resting there all along. But the data it carried told a different story. Time inside the bubble had shifted again. Not violently, not unpredictably, just subtly, like two clocks drifting out of sync by a fraction of a breath. The lambda echo was stronger this time, still soft, still gentle, but unmistakably clearer. Its rhythm had expanded, revealing faint harmonics that had never been seen before. Patterns, layered within patterns, curves within curves, like listening closely to a single note and realizing it contains an entire melody. The scientists examined this data for months, not because it was threatening, but because it was beautiful. The more they studied, the more they suspected that the bubble had briefly drifted through a region where space-time itself was thinner, where the vacuum softened into something smoother than usual. Not a tear, not a portal, just a quiet variation in the structure of the cosmos, one that had always been there, unnoticed. In the years that followed, warp navigators began mapping these thin places. They discovered that some folds glided more easily through them, shortening journeys not by force, but by surrendering to the natural flow of curvature. Ships traveling through these soft regions reported unusually calm bubbles, unusually steady rhythms, and unusually vivid starlight drifting past the windows. Travelers said the stars looked closer there, as if the universe leaned in, curious and welcoming. I remember passing through one such region during a long journey between two outer colonies. The bubble hummed around the ship with a warmth that felt almost alive. The lambda echo pulsed faintly, steady as a lullaby. Outside, the stars shimmered like threads of silver dust floating through water. Time seemed to slow, not because anything was dragging, but because everything was too peaceful to notice the minutes passing. I rested in the observation chair and let the universe drift past me. The ship was moving, but my body felt as if I were floating in a dream, weightless, suspended, timeless. Moments like that are why people fell in love with warp travel. Not because it made the universe smaller, but because it made the universe softer. It revealed that creation was not a harsh void to fight against, but a quiet ocean that welcomed gentle travelers. A place where distance was a suggestion, not a command. Where time breathed slowly. Where motion could feel like meditation. Warp travel did not change the universe. It simply allowed humanity to notice the parts that had been whispering all along. As humanity drifted farther along the quiet folds of space-time, our relationship with the cosmos slowly transformed into something more intimate, more reflective. No longer were we visitors pushing through a hostile void. We became gentle wanderers, gliding across a universe that felt more like a sleeping giant than an empty expanse. Warp travel changed the way we listened. It changed the way we breathed. It taught us to sense the subtle rhythms woven into the vacuum itself. Rhythms that had always been there, but were too soft for hurried minds to perceive. One of the most profound changes came not from the ships or the engineers, but from the travelers themselves. People who journeyed through warp corridors often described a growing sense of internal stillness. Some said it felt like floating underwater without the weight of pressure. Others compared it to standing in a quiet forest just before dawn, when every branch and leaf seems to hold its breath. In that silence, the noise of ordinary life faded. Thoughts slowed. Memories softened. Warp travel became as much a contemplative experience as a technological one. Across the colonies and research stations, a tradition slowly formed. Travelers began keeping journals not of distances traveled, but of the quiet moments they experienced while drifting between stars. They wrote about the soft glow of nebulae appearing like gentle brushstrokes outside their windows, about the faint pulse they felt through the hull when the lambda echo rippled beneath the bubble, about how the emptiness of space began to feel more like a presence than a void. Reading these journals, you would think warp travel was less about reaching new places and more about rediscovering the forgotten corners of the human mind. Some journals described something even more subtle, the feeling that the universe itself was watching, not with eyes or intention, but with a kind of vast awareness folded into its structure. Travelers sometimes spoke of a warmth in the bubble, a sensation like being held in a quiet embrace. Others wrote that distant stars seemed to brighten as they drifted past, as though acknowledging their presence. Scientists dismissed these observations as psychological effects, natural responses to extended periods of stillness. But the travelers who felt them knew there was something more, something gentle, something old, something woven into the very fabric of curved space. These sensations deepened after the long-range tests revealed that the warp bubble brushed against thinner regions of space-time. When ships passed through these areas, everything seemed to soften further. Time felt smoother. Light felt warmer. The lambda echo extended into longer, gentler waves, as if the bubble were drifting across a deeper layer of cosmic memory. Travelers in those regions reported dreams unlike any they had before, dreams of floating through endless fields of starlight, dreams of glowing currents weaving patterns in the dark, dreams that lingered long after they woke. I once traveled through one of these thin regions, far from any star system, where the nearest sun was little more than a faint pinprick on the horizon. The bubble hummed softly around the ship, and the echo pulsed beneath it like a distant drumbeat. Outside the viewport, the universe seemed to stretch into a vast sea of dim silver light. I remember closing my eyes and feeling the quiet fold of geometry beneath the vessel, like lying on a warm surface that gently rose and fell. It felt as though the universe was breathing, not literally, of course, but rhythmically, patiently, the way a great ocean breathes along the shore. Moments like that make you forget the concept of distance. They make you forget time. They make you feel as though you've drifted beyond the boundaries of ordinary existence and into a deeper layer where everything is soft and slow and kind. The ship continued gliding through that region for hours, though I felt only minutes pass. Every few moments, the lambda echo brushed against the hull like a ripple of calm air. And in that quiet, I understood why so many travelers described warp space as a kind of cosmic cradle. Even scientists studying the phenomenon from afar began to speak differently. Their reports shifted from technical analysis to something almost poetic. They spoke about the tenderness of curvature, about the hidden flexibility of reality, about the universe's patience. For a field grounded in equations and measurable data, this shift was remarkable. But warp travel had gently dissolved the hard line between science and sensation. When you drift through folded space, feeling the cosmos settle around you like warm water, it becomes difficult to separate the two. As humanity continued exploring, ships began to linger in certain regions, not for scientific study, but simply for the experience of drifting. Travelers spent days floating through quiet corridors where starlight thickened into soft haze. They spent nights watching distant galaxies move across the warped windows like slow lanterns. Time no longer felt like something to measure, but like something to savor. Even the idea of having a destination seemed to lose urgency. Warp travel wasn't about where you arrived. It was about how gently you moved through the universe to get there. I often wonder if this was always the universe's intention to show us that movement could be soft, that distance could be flexible, that existence could be calm. Or perhaps it wasn't intention at all. Perhaps the universe was simply being itself, and we finally learned to listen. What I know for certain is that warp travel changed everything. Not because it carried us quickly, but because it carried us quietly. It revealed that beneath the familiar fabric of reality lies a deeper texture, one woven from stillness and subtlety, a place where the cosmos sighs, and those who drift with it can almost feel the warmth of that breath. As the understanding of warp travel deepened, scientists began designing one final experiment, one that would test not the limits of distance, but the quiet boundaries of space-time itself. For years, the warp bubble had carried ships gently between stars, drifting through folds with a tenderness that felt almost meditative. The lambda echo had become a familiar companion, a soft pulse felt every time the bubble opened or dissolved. But there remained one lingering question, a gentle mystery that no amount of careful listening had yet solved. Where exactly did the bubble go in those fleeting moments when it formed? The craft vanished from ordinary coordinates, but not into chaos or violence. It slipped somewhere with elegance, with calm, somewhere that left behind a faint temporal drift and a deeper harmonic in the echo. To explore this, humanity prepared the most sensitive warp probe ever constructed. It was built not for durability, not for speed, but for listening. Its hull was lined with fields that could sense the smallest changes in geometry. Its core housed instruments capable of detecting oscillations so faint they blurred into the background hum of the universe. When the probe was completed, it looked more like an object sculpted for meditation than for exploration. Rounded surfaces, balanced lines, a shape that seemed to invite stillness. The launch site was quieter than any before it, not out of fear or tension, but out of respect for the experiment's delicacy. Researchers stood around the chamber, speaking only in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb the gentle rhythms they had spent so many years studying. When the regulators activated, the bubble blossomed around the probe like a thin shell of moonlight. The shimmer grew, curved, and then folded the vessel into the soft geometry. It drifted away so smoothly that some said they felt the air lighten around them. The probe glided through folded space for longer than any vessel before it. Minutes passed, then more. The instruments tracking the bubble's passage recorded unusual harmonics, subtle, layered, almost musical. The lambda echo grew rich with overtones, like a chord forming inside the breathing of space-time. Nothing alarming, nothing sharp, just a deepening of the rhythm humanity had been listening to for decades. And then, with the same effortless grace, the probe returned. It reappeared in its cradle, its surface unmarked, its systems calm, but the data it carried felt like the quiet answer to a question no one had dared to ask aloud. The temporal drift was slightly larger than before, not enough to cause concern, but enough to reveal that the bubble had lingered in a region where time flowed differently. The harmonic structure of the lambda echo suggested that the bubble had brushed against something smooth, something vast, something that extended far deeper than the ordinary layers of space-time. The scientists examined the readings for months. Each curve, each oscillation, each faint ripple told a gentle, wordless story. The warp bubble had passed through a layer of space-time that rarely interacts with matter, a layer where geometry softens, where time loosens, where the vacuum becomes something warmer, quieter, more fluid. Some called it the deep field, others called it the inner membrane. But the travelers who listened to the recordings gave it a simpler, more human name: the quiet place. No one could say for certain what the quiet place was, but every ship that drifted through those regions reported the same sensations: warmer starlight, smoother folds, echoes that pulsed like soft breathing. There were no anomalies, no dangers, just a deeper sense of calm, as though the bubble were brushing against the oldest part of the universe, the part that remembers how space first learned to stretch. As this understanding spread, humanity began designing warp routes that intentionally skimmed along the quiet place. Pilots described the experience as drifting along the edge of a dream, gentle, immersive, peaceful. They said the starlight there shimmered in softer hues, bending in slow spirals as though dancing to a rhythm no human instrument could fully record. They said the silence in those folds felt different too, thicker, more enveloping, like being wrapped in a soft blanket woven from gravity itself. During one journey through the quiet place, I found myself staring out at a distant cluster of stars. They sparkled faintly against the dark, but something about the way they curved along the warp window made them feel alive, like lanterns floating on a dark river. The bubble moved with such effortless ease that I forgot the ship was traveling at all. Time stretched into something velvety, something soft. I watched the stars roll past, one after another, drifting like thoughts in a half-sleeping mind. In that moment, I felt a strange warmth, not physical, not emotional, but something deeper, a sense of being carried by the universe rather than simply traveling through it, a sense that the cosmos was aware of its travelers in some quiet, ancient way, not watching, not reacting, just. When the ship eventually emerged from the quiet place, the transition was so smooth I barely noticed it. The stars sharpened slightly, the echo faded back into its familiar rhythm, the fold loosened, but something inside me had shifted. I realized then that warp travel was not just a technological breakthrough. It was a change in how we exist inside the universe. A reminder that the cosmos has always held gentle pathways, waiting for beings patient enough to drift along them. Warp travel had revealed those pathways not by force, not by brilliance, but by stillness. And in that stillness, we found the universe's most tender truth. We were never traveling alone. Somewhere between the folds of normal space and the quiet place beneath it, there is a region where even the echoes fade into stillness. I often drift there at the end of long journeys, letting the last traces of starlight settle against the hull like soft dust. In those moments, with the warp bubble easing into silence and the universe stretching calm and endless around me, I feel as though I'm floating inside the memory of creation itself. Everything slows, everything softens. Even my thoughts seem to move with the quiet rhythm of distant galaxies turning in their ancient arcs. And I think about how far humanity has come, not in distance, but in understanding. We once believed the cosmos was cold, unreachable, ruled by rigid limits. But now, as ships drift across folds woven with gentleness, we know the truth is softer. Space bends like fabric, and the universe carries us not because we command it, but because we learn to move quietly enough to be held. Soon, my ship will ease back into ordinary space. Stars will regain their familiar shapes. The echo will fade, but the calm will linger, the way warmth lingers after a hand leaves your shoulder. And as I close my eyes, letting the last hum of the warp bubble dissolve into silence, I know that wherever we drift next, the universe will be there, waiting with the same patient rhythm, ready to carry us a little farther into its gentle dark.